Hey everyone, Anarch here, and this is another installment in the series Anarch Abridged, where I just sit down and kind of have a casual talk with the camera. If you're new to the channel, which it's quite possible that you are given the topic of this particular video, this channel is about inspecting the philosophical underpinnings of leftist ideology and maybe more specifically anarchist and libertarian socialist philosophy. And if that interests you, I highly recommend that you go over to my channel and take a look at some of these longer video essays that I've produced. These are much deeper dives into these topics than the discussions that we'll be having within this video. That's because today's video is going to be a sort of like rapid fire discussion of a bunch of different terminology within the left. You might say that this is kind of just the most common jargon that you hear leftists using. And what I'm kind of hoping I can do in this video is just clear up what a lot of that jargon means. And I offer a warning to anybody here that has a very good understanding of theory that all of these explanations that I'm giving are sort of necessarily brief. They're going to cut out a ton of detail in the process. Obviously, there's a lot more to be said about each of these topics that I'm going to bring up. So please extend some charity to these brief discussions. And to those who are new here and for which this video is appropriately educational, have some patience because it's quite likely we're going to get around to at least one or two terms on this list that you have probably heard but did not know the meaning of. So with that disclaimer in place, let's just get started on this list. The first one I have on the list is mutual aid. And mutual aid can best be understood as a system of distribution that is based on reciprocal exchange, but without the expectation of remuneration. So what I mean to say by that is that we are trying to establish networks wherein we directly distribute things to people and wherein everybody, as much as we can, both gives and takes. That doesn't mean that everything has to be like a trade between individuals. It just means that you give freely and you take freely. And the system works better the more people can give freely, obviously. This is a system which obviously requires some amount of trust and solidarity between the members, but that is the basic meaning of the phrase mutual aid. And mutual aid is a term that was really brought into popularization by the theorist Peter Kropotkin, wherein he wrote a book called Mutual Aid, where he discussed how it was cooperation which had led to the prolific success of many species within nature, trying to kind of push back against this concept that nature is all based on competition and that survival of the fittest only involves competition. So Kropotkin wrote us an extensive work talking about how that is not true either in the animal kingdom nor in human beings. And this principle of mutual aid expanded over the years. So the next one in the list is one people might be sort of familiar with, or you might have heard, and that is the means of production. So if you're on the left, you've certainly heard this one. But if you've also been talking with anybody on the left, this word, this phrase may have come up in your conversations. So the means of production is an economic term. I don't know if it was created by Karl Marx, but it was most certainly popularized by Karl Marx. And the means of production is basically all of those material components of the economy, excluding labor. So that would include the factories, infrastructure, your hammer and nails, but also it would include the land and the ecology. And this is a really important term because in traditional leftist theory, it is thought that the development of the means of production is a really important part about how societies move and change over time. And also, it determines a class system. It determines who is the ruling class. So there's a lot to be said about that. But that's our brief discussion of what the means of production is. The next on the list is direct action. So direct action, I describe this as action without an intermediary. That is to say, the people themselves act to exact outcomes. They create the needed systems. They distribute the needed aid directly. It has been famously said by David Graeber that direct action is ultimately the defiant insistence on acting as if one is already free. The reason why this is important is because direct action sort of stands in opposition to, for example, using the parliamentary system, getting elected and trying to, do get out the vote campaigns or get people to go vote on measures and things like that. Direct action is us seeing a problem and then just fixing it directly instead of hoping that some power structure outside of ourselves is going to do the work for us. The next one on the list is prefiguration. This one you may not have heard as much. I think that if you're not a leftist, there's a good chance you've never heard this word, prefiguration. But if you're a leftist, you probably have heard it. And I think the prefiguration can be understood pretty simply through the phrase building the new in the shell of the old, which is an old IWW phrase. Building the new in the shell of the old is trying to create as much of our ideal future within the current world as is conceivably possible. Obviously, that's not entirely possible. You can't just create a perfect world within the one that exists, because the world that exists is always going to be pushing back on you and, trying to sabotage what you create. But this is the constructive approach to transforming society. You create new structures, transformative structures that act in a revolutionary sense. And if you're wondering what that word revolution means, we'll get to that here in just a moment. The next one is this word praxis. What is praxis? Well, on the left, you have to have heard this word 1,000 times. And there's kind of this misunderstanding that praxis just means practice. And actually, I think in German, it literally does. I think the word praxis actually means practice in German. But praxis is not just practice or action. It is a combination of theory and action. That is to say, it is informed action. So praxis is basically action in feedback with analysis and knowledge and study. And then it is in a sort of a feedback cycle where our actions then inform the theory and analysis that we write. So praxis is not just kind of, acting aimlessly. It's not praxis necessarily if it's not informed and strategic and thought out, and that it doesn't feed back into a process of learning as well. So praxis is a kind of continual feedback cycle. It might also be said, praxis has this implication that what you are doing is actually going to have some effect on society. So, it wouldn't be praxis if it didn't work, right? It's not praxis to just kind of flail uselessly. That's the meaning of praxis. So, when you hear somebody say, oh, that's praxis, that's kind of what they're saying there. The next one on the list is revolution. So this word has honestly so many meanings that I'm not even going to pretend to set out one concrete understanding of it. I'm just going to kind of explain it in the broadest sense. Revolution is a complete transformation of the foundations of society. The key relations which prop up that society have been transformed. And that's important to understand as contrasted to reform. In reform, you're making small tweaks here and there. You're gradually adjusting the system as it stands, and you're trying to get it closer to some ideal outcome. In revolution, we are trying to completely transform the foundations of society. So that means that there is kind of, in general, two different approaches. One is you build the replacement structures, as we talked about in prefiguration. Prefiguration is a kind of revolution. The other kind of revolution might be called sometimes called a capital R revolution, which involves some sort of violent conflict where we coup the state, overthrow the power structures that exist, and put a new society in place. So that's kind of the broad overview of what is meant by revolution. The next three here are all kinds of, they're all different sorts of property relations. That is to say, they're different ways that people might own things. And they determine how different societies will function depending on which of these might be predominant. The first in the list is private property. So when leftists say private property, they're specifying a particular kind of property, and I'll delineate a little bit further here in this next one, but private property is absentee ownership. That is to say, it's ownership only by claim of some kind, either claim by law or claim by violence. And that's its only basis. Its only basis is that you own it even if you don't use it, even if you're really not present to utilize that property. Private property is extremely central to capitalism. You might be thinking, oh, okay, I own my belongings as private property. Well, some of them yes, and some of them no. Private property also has the implication that you are deriving profit from it. It's kind of external to yourself. You don't necessarily use it, and you're deriving profit. So typically you're going to use private property. An example of private property in capitalism might be the means of production. You're going to use this private property often to employ others, and then you are going to derive surplus from the use of that property and from the labor of others, and then you are going to pay that out as wages in capitalism. So this is a very central concept in leftist analysis of capitalism, is the domination of private property as a norm. Now, I know what most of you, especially those of you who are not on the left, are thinking is, what's the difference between, that and the things I use in my daily life? Like, does that include, my toothbrush and my car and my house? The answer is no. Those things are example of what is called personal property. So once again, remember that private property is that which is only owned by claim. It is absentee ownership. You are not an absentee owner of your home or your toothbrush or your car. You utilize those things. That's kind of the most important part. They don't just kind of sit there and molder. They get use by you. You own them by way of your need of them. That's really important. It's often said in the sort of common parlance that communists want to abolish all private property, and then people think that means they want to abolish personal property. When communists or leftists or anarchists or anybody else, socialists, say that they want to abolish private property, what they're saying is they want to abolish absentee ownership, and they want to establish a society where people own what they use. So the next one in the list is social ownership. So this is kind of, contrasted with this concept of social ownership. So if absentee ownership is not good, does that mean that we can't have factories? We can't have infrastructure? No, it means that insofar as the surpluses of those things are created, they should be socially distributed. And that's social ownership. Social ownership is property that is owned by society. The surplus gets distributed to society rather than to particular individuals. Once again, this could be considered shared property. It's almost like the personal property of everyone in society. So, some like state socialists would consider state ownership to be a form of social ownership. I'm an anarchist, so I disagree. I do not think that's a form of social ownership. I think only direct control over things is social ownership. So that is to say, I think that unless you have a say over a thing's usage, you do not own it. And so I advocate direct ownership and control over all of those things that we all socially utilize together. So now we are on to another term, which is widely misused. And might I add, I think it's one that you're going to see a lot, both on the left and outside of the left. And that is intersectionality. First, I want to say intersectionality does not mean trying to figure out who is most oppressed. It is not about ranking who is more and less oppressed. It is not the oppression Olympics. That is not what intersectionality is. It's an analysis of how different oppressions intersect with one another to produce unique oppressive environments. That is to say, as people are affected by more and more of these kinds of oppressive structures, it doesn't just add 1 + 1 + 1, it reforms their experience fundamentally. Bell Hooks says that it is reconstitutive. It reconstitutes that person's experience. So that person ends up having a unique experience, which is very difficult to quantify by simply saying, that they are trans and Black and a woman. All of those things don't just add together to create 3 times the oppression, although they do experience all 3 of those systems of oppression. It creates a fundamentally new experience, which can only be understood there at that intersection. And that is an incredibly important part of understanding intersectionality. It is that new intersections create new paradigms for the people that rest within them. So the next one is anarchism. This channel is about anarchism, and appropriately, I've got a pretty short description of anarchism just to start with, and that is anarchism is the opposition to all hierarchical power structures. Not necessarily the opposition to all hierarchies. It's possible you could have voluntary hierarchies, but all hierarchical power structures. And power structures are, structures which help coordinate people's powers together. And wherein people's powers are coordinated as in a hierarchical fashion, the anarchist contends that what you're going to get is domination and coercion, that by its very nature expands the domination of human beings. And the anarchist is in opposition to domination and coercion. So, especially as a method for social organization. It's also a body of analysis that seeks to understand how power structures function, not only hierarchical power structures, but horizontal power structures, which we might propose to do instead. It is also then a set of methods for transforming society. So what you will find is throughout the anarchist literature, there are various attempts to do these 3 things. It is all of them hold in common an opposition to all hierarchical power structures. They all oppose domination and coercion as a method for social organization. But they might differ on their body of analysis, how they analyze power structures, and what methods they think will be used to transform society. You're going to find that will differ as per different anarchist tendencies. The next one is anarchy. So this term anarchy, surely the majority of people associate the word anarchy with chaos. But anarchy doesn't mean chaos in political theory. Anarchy actually is a society where we have abolished all hierarchical power structures. And so it's appropriate that hierarchical power tries to portray anarchy as chaos. What they're telling you is if we were to abolish rulership, everything would be chaos. Rulers are the only thing that force us to act in this ordered, coordinated way. And the anarchist contends this is not true, that in the absence of hierarchical power structures, there would be other ways to organize society. It is a society that is defined through freedom, solidarity, equality of structural power, and seeks to expand the powers of every unique individual as maximally as possible. Obviously, that is to say that we don't expand those powers such that they then begin to harm others. We are looking to find that harmony of everyone's powers, which adds to the total of everyone's powers. And we want to do that with an absence of hierarchical power structures. The last thing I might say about anarchism and anarchy is that within their etymology, it's an, which is to say without, and then archy, which is to say rulership. So it's essentially just absence of rulership, no rulers. That's what anarchism and anarchy are all about. The next one in the list is socialism. I can guarantee 99% of you have heard this word, and if you're not on the left, you probably have been misinformed about what the word socialism means. Socialism is not when the government does stuff. I want to repeat, socialism is not just when the government does stuff. Social programs are not socialism. Socialism is social ownership of the means of production. Remember earlier how I talked about the means of production? Well, it is social ownership of the means of production. And in many occasions, more specifically, it means worker ownership of the means of production. This is important because the state owning the means of production cannot be socialism because the state is not the people. The state is not society. The state is its own entity. It is a body comprised of very particular people, and those particular people are not the entirety of society. So, nonetheless, some people do believe that state ownership is social ownership, and they create the next thing in this list, and that is state capitalism. State capitalism is an economy where you have nationalized a huge amount of industry. That is to say, the state has come to own the means of production. But one will notice, once again, the state is not the masses of people. The state is not society. So when the state owns the means of production, that is a new form of private ownership. That is now absentee ownership again. And they own it and have the power to control it, and the workers and society does not. Therefore, it is not social ownership. Therefore, it is not socialism. So that's why you will hear lots of people on the left really emphasize that socialism is not just when the government does stuff, okay? Social programs are an example of something that is called social democracy, and when you nationalize a huge amount of industry, that's an example of something that is called state capitalism, where the state becomes the monopoly capitalist. The very last one, here on the list is most certainly one everybody is going to be very familiar with, but just like the word socialism, it's going to be one that a lot of people have been misinformed as to what it means. Communism is not when the state controls everything. There's kind of this common joke on the left that, socialism is when the government does stuff, and communism is when the state does all the stuff. Right? This idea that communism is just lots and lots of socialism. It's real hard socialism. As we've discussed, the state doing more stuff is actually state capitalism. So you might say to yourself, well, then what is communism? Well, communism is, ironically, given that fact, a stateless, classless, moneyless society. I just want to repeat that. Communism, by definition, is a society wherein you have abolished the state, abolished the class system, and you have abolished currency and money and exchange. Okay? So you might be saying, well, okay, how does anything get decided and distributed? It gets decided and distributed from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. That is to say, those who can produce do, and those who need have goods distributed to them directly. And how do things get decided? Well, a phrase has often been used, and that is the free association of free producers. So free association, that is to say, all of the people in society come together into associations to make decisions together, of free producers. That is to say, the people who produce and make things come together into associations and make decisions about distribution with one another. And this is why communism is stateless, because there is fundamentally a lack of a central authority that is making the decisions for everyone else. So a central planning apparatus, which functions without the input of the workers, is definitionally not communist. It is pretty much literally the exact opposite of communism, in fact. Communism is often the intended end goal of a lot of leftist ideologies. I would even say the majority of leftist ideologies, with, various exceptions. So, I hope this video was useful for you. If you're new to the channel, please go click subscribe if this interests you. I talk about stuff like this all the time on the channel and in way more depth. This was very much a skin deep analysis of each of these concepts. If you are not new to the channel, I encourage you to go over to my Patreon and become a patron. Right now is a really important time in my career as a YouTuber. I'm getting really close to being able to support myself on the channel alone, which would mean that I'd be able to produce quite a bit more content on a much more regular basis. And I would be able to create those big, long video essays much faster as well. Lastly, if you like the video, go click like. If you have any thoughts that you want to air out in the comment section, please do. Every single comment you leave is beneficial for my channel and the algorithm. And that includes even if you disagree with me. Just be gentle with me, because as I said, each of these are abbreviations. I'm not trying to encompass the entirety of the meaning of any of these terms within these short little descriptions, but if you'd like to go down into the comments and then maybe expand on these definitions, if you found that one of my definitions didn't include some nuance and some description and some history, it would be so helpful, so useful for you to go down into the comments and provide some extra context for people that might be interested. Anyway, that is it for this video, everyone. It was good talking with you, and I'll see you next time.